our first big logistics and supply chain event in person in over 2 years. We just got back from Modex 2022, and man, was it an amazing show. It really was fantastic. From the industry challenges faced by thousands of businesses and how the innovations of today will impact the solutions of tomorrow. We've got it all, plus dozens of great interviews from the show floor, all just ahead on this brand new episode of Delivering the Goods. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Delivering the Goods. My name is Mark Babin. It's great to have you with me. Of course, this is our logistics and supply chain show that takes a deep look at the current challenges and the emerging technologies of the industry. Now, on this pod, we are excited to bring you a roundup of Modex 2022, one of the leading supply chain and logistics events in the world, which happened, as I said, just a few weeks back in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia. We had the distinct opportunity during the show to interview dozens of event exhibitors and attendees to get their impressions on the industry as it is now and how it will look in the future. So, of course, during this episode, you're going to hear snippets of many of these interviews and thoughts from what people at the show actually think what's going on in the real world. So those will be just ahead. Now, joining me for this episode, I'm very excited to welcome our head of content and PR, Michael Wilkinson. Michael leads the way here when it comes to all the external communications and has really got some great insights when it comes to logistics and the supply chain industries. Michael, welcome to the show at long last. I can't believe it took us literally 35 episodes to get you on here, but welcome to the show. Really looking forward to your insights from Modex and what we hear from various interviews today.
Yeah, delighted to be here. I'm delighted to talk about these interviews. There's some really, really good stuff. Some really interesting insights from people from across the industry at different stages of the supply chain. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, I think we got lots of interesting topics that are going to come up. So on that, of course, Modex 22, one of the biggest shows for the industry, and it was one of the first shows to happen since the pandemic of this industry. So it was great. It took place over 4 days in one of the largest conference centers in the US. This place was huge, 400,000 square feet of reserved space for the show. Now, to put that into context for the listeners, that's 9 American football fields of show floor. This place was huge. Our feet were just pounding by the end of the day. It had 1,000 different exhibitors at the show, which was fantastic. And it brought close to 30,000 people. So a lot of people, a lot of exhibitors, but everyone focusing on what's an incredible industry. And it was fantastic to see it back in action. So with a show as big as it was, and like I said, the first actual logistics and supply event show since the pandemic began, everyone was excited to get back. But we had to address, of course, the significant impact that the last few years have had on the industry. So from the pandemic that we continue to see to the crisis in the Suez Canal, of course, everyone saw that. Even today, we see the active crisis in Eastern Europe. All of this creating some major waves of disruption in how the supply chain flows. So Michael, even just with the surveys that we've ran, the content that we've written, this is a fact that we simply can't ignore today.
No, absolutely. It's something which is affecting everybody. And really, we've come from a position where people have been expecting to have, just-in-time deliveries, making everything possible. It's been because of these innovations which have been around for a long time, essentially an industry which has been invisible in many ways and kind of deliberately so. And people have, just got to the point where we expect things all the time, within a day or the same day, even with Amazon. With this huge rise in demand has also come this, huge increase of expectations from consumers. With the pandemic, a lot of this has just been, brought to an incredible standstill super quickly. At the same time, a lot of the guys that you were speaking to were dealing with the fact that you have, on the one hand, huge restrictions, but then at the same time, people are turning to their phones to buy everything, basically, and one of the things that we find in our surveys is that, it's not just, people getting their groceries anymore. People are buying things from furniture to electronics to their clothes, and the younger the audience, the more likely they are to do so. We're finding that millennials and Gen Z were far more likely to be buying a far wider range of things and expecting them to show up outside their house. So this is something which has definitely been affected by the pandemic. And it means that, a lot of logistic companies that you spoke to are in this catch-22 situation and trying to do their best.
Yeah, it really does seem like a lot are still catching up, but it's changing the way they think. So I think you've really pointed that out nicely. So during the show, as I mentioned, we had a chance to speak with a lot of different people. One of them was Stuart Britland. He's a strategic account executive at Varcode. They're a logistics company that empowers a safer and more sustainable global supply chain for food and pharmaceuticals, something rather important given what we've seen today and the importance of moving that type of thing around the world as fast as possible. So this is what he had to say when we asked him how these crises are affecting businesses in the industry.
From what I've seen so far, I mean, the impacts have been far-reaching. They're so complex, it's almost too difficult to put your finger on any single one. Customers have closed their doors. It's been difficult to get in and do operational deployments, testing of new technology. It's slowed down the adoption of anything new and innovative, which is the area that I'm focused on right now in our business. And I think it's slowed down the entire supply chain industry's ability to look at, evaluate, and adopt new technology that's going to address a lot of these problems, because we can't get in front of customers and talk to them. This show, I think, at least for me, it's the first time in 2 years I've been back on the road in front of clients. Everything's been a Zoom call. It's exciting to get in front of people and show them what you're doing and talk to them and see the light bulb go off. And if this momentum continues, and I think it will, I think we're in for a really strong, the next 12 to 24 months are going to be great.
Yeah. I mean, Mark, Stuart, he really hits the nail on the head there. They are caught in this position where they're between a rock and a hard place. They're on the one side trying to introduce these new innovations to customers, but at the same time, they haven't had a lot of their staff on hand for them to try things out, for them to put them into motion. And I think that one thing that we've noticed as well, I think that everybody who's been ordering things have noticed, is that where they can make these innovations are things to do with the direct delivery, to do with the last mile. So, for example, we've seen a huge increase in BYOD, logistic companies, being able to scale up their workforces a lot quicker by, working with smartphone devices and working with apps where they can, the worker can bring their own devices, BYOD stands for. And these are the sort of innovations which have meant that, they can get over a bit of this hump. They can do things like Corona deliveries where they're leaving things outside the front door. But it's a really, really tough scenario. But they're doing their best. And I think we'll hear some more really interesting innovations as we go through here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how Stuart said, just to be back in front of people to show the solutions or show the technologies they've been innovating on. Because sure, there's been a ton of innovations. You just mentioned a handful of them, but to show them virtually it's so difficult because it's intangible, right? To actually go to events like Modex or other events and to show customers and clients in person how this works.
Yeah.
That's invaluable.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that pain ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we also brought this question forward to Caitlin Peterson. She's the commercial integration leader at Caleris. They are a supply chain execution platform based out of the US. Here's what she had to say about the impact of the past few years on the visibility of the supply chain world to the average consumer. This is a really, really great point from Caitlin.
The first thing is that there's a lot more focus on visibility of where their goods are. If you think back to a few years ago, when you told people you worked in supply chain, we work in supply chain technology, people didn't really know what that meant. But what the pandemic has done is created supply chain as a household term. So people actually know when you're saying, oh, the Suez, what's happening with Ukraine. It's the first time we've really seen supply chain as front page news, and people are starting to become more aware of that. What it's also doing is showing consumers that supply chain isn't just magic, that there's real work that goes into it, and that in order to do the work, you have to have visibility to what's going on in your supply chain, but also the execution and being able to make changes and be resilient in terms of flexible of, hey, this ship is delayed, what do I do with my inventory, or my stores are stocking out? Do I need to purchase more ahead of time? What changes do you need to make in your business model to support the customers at the end of the day? But you see things like Amazon starting to consolidate shipments, right? So you have your Amazon Prime Day where instead of everything showing up immediately, you can say, I want everything to show up on Tuesday. And that makes it not only easier for Amazon, but it's also more eco-friendly so that you don't have a FedEx truck, a UPS truck, a USPS truck all going down your street the same day. So you're starting to see consumers make that type of purchases, but I think they're also thinking about it a little bit more. Like I saw an article the other day that said TJ Maxx and Home Goods and some of those stores that take inventory that's maybe seasonal are just have a flood of inventory, and people are purchasing it now instead of waiting for Halloween or Christmas or something because it wasn't necessarily there on time when they needed it.
Yeah, I mean, she made a lot of good points. I think the main one she made, the visibility factor, the fact that supply chain wasn't a household name before. Logistics wasn't, you knew delivery, but that was about the extent of it.
Right.
You look at the Suez Canal crisis as a good one here. It really shined a whole light on this is how this supply chain issue is going to impact everything. And it really made it a household name more than it ever was. I love how she brought that up. It changed the way that we shop. It changes how what we expect from suppliers, deliverers, retailers when we shop. It's changed everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I think that, a lot of what she was focusing on, and I think she made some great points, was visibility is important on their side, but it's also a lot more important for consumers because we've all dealt with situations where we've been expecting stuff, it hasn't come. We've become more aware. Well, actually, this is a lot more complicated than we expect. But at the same time, as consumers, the thing that we've found that people are really looking for is a combination of visibility, control, and accountability from the company. If they're more aware of where their things are at every point, we also want to have a better idea of where things are whenever they're coming towards us. So some of the stats that we found recently, which were really interesting in terms of what it is that consumers would really like to have now, the main thing would be having GPS tracking. Something like 95% of people said that would be super useful for their deliveries to be able to see where they are at each point along the way. And I think around about 9 and 10 said that going a little bit further than that, they would love to be able to have dynamic deliveries. So changing it as it's on the way. At the same time, people have been in a situation now where, over the last 2 years, they feel that deliveries have either stayed about the same speed or they've got slower. I think the majority of people that responded to our survey said that. So rather than bells and whistles and all sorts of fancy things, what matters the most to people is getting things consistently on time. So that's where the main priority continues to lie with shoppers after this period of time where, things just haven't appeared like magic anymore. And we now understand, the hugely intricate nature of the whole industry.
Yeah, or at least we pretend to understand a little bit more of it as we'll learn a little bit further down this interview how complex it is and how layered it is.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the transparency to the industry, our changed expectations and how we just want it. We just want it now. We want it faster, even though we understand the rest of the processes. Yeah, you're completely right. I think speed is a major factor that came up in a lot of our content. So yeah, another really great point. We spoke to Charlotte Giroux, the director of sales at Planiform. They're a company that we got to see in action at the event. They're actually right across from us. Really cool operation they have in specializing storing, organizing, and moving garments on hangers. So another part of the industry that you wouldn't think existed, but it's all done with automated process. It was very, very cool to see in person. She had a similar impression. Here's what she had to say on that same point.
And that is also what's pushing automation in that sense, because if you want to be able to get that order out on the same day or even in the same hour, you need to have a quick system to be able to deliver that to the customer. So we are seeing that demand for speed in the systems, and that's why we need to have those automated systems come in and help.
Yeah, that demand for speed. I mean, that's exactly what we spoke about, right? It's the change demand for consumers and from business to business as well. Everyone has a change demand in how fast they expect something to get to them, perhaps because of all the crises that have happened and the visibility put on it. So really great point from Charlotte there. The last interview I want to highlight on this section of the podcast is one that I had with Tolgar Appelgut. the Senior Director of Marketing at Infinite Peripherals. They're a leading innovator of enterprise mobility. He addressed the issues that exist by simply trying to get enough parts with the supply chain shortages of something that's a massive priority. So here's what Tolgar had to say. Let's have a listen.
We found often that we might have 99 parts and we're missing that one part that we need to actually build that product. So that's been a real challenge. As you said, we were running lean in the past and that worked really well. But now we are looking to maintain higher inventory levels so that we always have product on hand and ready accessible.
Definitely a trend we heard throughout the show. We used to run lean, but now we have to stock up. Mm-hmm. Right to the heart of the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, obviously with greater warehouse spaces, this means that there's also, a far greater need for technologies to help you organize this space, to help you understand where things are. And like we've been saying, to have greater internal visibility as well of where everything is. One way in which we've seen people moving in that direction is by integrating things like barcode scanning into drones that can go around warehouses and very quickly collect what would have taken warehouse staff, 10 times as long.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an issue that we heard over and over again. Like we ran lean. We have to have more space now. We have to optimize the space we do have, and people simply can't do that the way they used to. So
right. And sometimes people have to scale up their warehouse space so quickly that they don't have time to build. They just have to hire some containers and use that instead. We've heard that a couple of times, actually. Yeah,
exactly. And they're reacting to what's happened, and it's moving that to more of a proactive state of mind moving forward. And that's what we're seeing all these new innovations come up to change that perception from reactive to proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, we can think of examples of, where massive companies, huge winners over the past number of years have been struck down or been really, really badly hurt because of a lack of space or because of a lack of, as a gentleman was saying there, maybe one specific part, everything to do with Peloton, the issues that they've had over the past year come down basically to that. A lot of the issues that they were having was just having the bikes there, being able to get them back if there's an issue with them, etc. So yeah, it can affect anybody. And it's just been a huge sea change that the industry didn't see coming. How could they have, especially whenever, so many efficiencies have been built into just-in-time deliveries.
Yeah, I mean, who could see it coming? That's exactly right. And who will see the next thing coming? They need to be prepared and thinking proactive today, not just waiting for the next thing to happen. So yeah, I like that point. So moving forward, I want to look at the trend of new innovations that we saw at Modex and how that's going to impact the industry moving into the next years, because of course what we see today will impact tomorrow. Now, without a doubt, this show was strongly and heavily influenced by automation, from automated warehouse tools to self-driving delivery systems. We even had a chance to see that viral dancing robot from Boston Dynamics, which was just super cool to see in person. But automation was everything. And that was the name of the game. So all about making those mundane tasks more automated and allowing people employed by the company to do more important tasks and to do more with the time that they have. Now, that's certainly a direction that we've spoken a lot about, but we love to see it, right, Michael?
Right, exactly. And ultimately, what it comes down to is, shaving off any seconds that you can, winning back any small efficiencies when your workforce are on the floor. And, there are so many different ways in which this is being done, the kind which you heard about at Modex, whether it's through drones, whether it's through other automated bots that are moving around the floor. That's very clearly the way forward at the moment.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we heard echoed throughout to everyone we spoke to really at the show. Specifically, we spoke to Andrew Brumfield, who works in engineering support at Scott. They had a really great display right kitty corner to our booth, where we had the pleasure of watching robots work kind of a supply chain and boxing and conveyor belt system with automated forklifts and everything. It was really, really cool. But automating warehouse management systems, I mean, that's what we got to see, and that's what was the show. So really, really cool. Here's what Andrew had to say when we asked if automation is the new standard moving forward.
Yes, it's definitely a long-term trend we're going to definitely see continue as the technology advances. It's definitely driving more effectiveness, more different design of vehicles, more applications, way farther from just a regular forklift or something to ride on. We're talking about many different ways of bringing solutions and accomplishing the goals of the customer.
Yeah, and he's completely right. This is much more than just single solutions that will solve the world's problems. This is much more than that. Automation does have room to grow throughout the industry and throughout the supply chain, from the beginning to the very end when the package is delivered to that end customer. The whole process has a chance to evolve, even with solutions that handle multiple tasks rather than a single task.
Yeah. And one thing I think is really interesting about the way he was talking about it is that, whenever we think about this, we imagine that it's completely, about reinventing the wheel. But, it could be, I think a lot of the time it's going to be about, building upon a lot of devices, a lot of technologies which we're already using, whether it's something like the humble forklift truck, or whether it's using the devices which people that are going around the warehouse are already using. So it could be that, if staff are using ruggedized devices and they're only using them for barcode scanning, in the future, I think we're going to be seeing people, scanning everything from container numbers to seal numbers to the license plates of vehicles, putting devices that they're already using into far greater use throughout the supply chain. Like I said, rather than looking towards solutions which mean you have to completely revamp everything, but just working with a lot of what's already there and just building upon it.
Enhancing what we have rather than reinventing the wheel 10 times over.
Exactly.
We don't want a guy walking around with a tool belt full of 10 different devices that all do a single task.
Right, exactly.
That's innovation and that's automating processes, but it's not improving process. And we're talking about making the day for a person who's working at it more efficient.
Yeah.
Do more tasks. Yeah, excellent. So we know automation is a key driver in the industry right now. We've touched on that multiple times. But what will it take to make these to make automation last as a long-term solution, like we just heard, and the one that sets the new standard for the coming year? Of course, we want innovations today that in 10 years, this is what it is, and we have to build upon that.
Right.
So we spoke to Juan Caceres from Interlake Mexelu, a leading company in the storage system market, and I really like how he addressed this exact point. So let's take a listen.
Well, with automation, you get better production, safer systems. We're getting to a point now where the prices are very comparable. From my point of view, at least, I feel that the price is the biggest point, their ROI. On some systems, we're seeing 2.5 years, 2 years. Once you start closing that gap with a good ROI, short ROI, prices that are comparable with what you do with regular racking, that's when automation is going to take off. I feel that it is here to stay. We get feedback from other companies. Some companies just, see what Amazon is doing, Tesla is doing. They like that aspect, but then, they don't have the capital to get into it. So we're also, in the foothold that we have, we're doing semi-automation as well, where you still require a driver, but we have systems like the pallet shuttle where you can bring the shuttle in and out. So it's not 100% automation. So you're trying to work with that. The other thing too, having that mentality of old rack, as I like to call it, the thing that's scary with automation is, hey, it's going to take away the jobs of the drivers. So that's the other thing with semi-automation. You can still keep those jobs because you need those people to move the product in and out. But like I said, you're making the system safer, you're increasing productivity, and you're increasing density for a system that's already there.
Just like you were talking about increasing that density, but his 3 points there with safety, productivity, and density, that's the core drivers that will make something a standard. But like he said in the beginning of that, price ultimately comes down to it, which I love his point on semi-automation or semi-integrating something. It kicks the ball in the right direction. It starts setting a base that a company can certainly build upon. And those baby steps are what going to make things become the new standard, right?
Yeah, and I think that they're really important that they're there now for smaller logistics companies that are looking at the behemoths and thinking like, they're going to be left in the dust unless they're able to completely overhaul everything and go completely, automate every single part of it. It doesn't need to be that way, as Juan was pointing out. So yeah, I think that there's lots of really interesting ways in which companies can start introducing their digital transformation of their processes while not completely breaking the bank and finding things which, are going to deliver an ROI within the first year or so. That's definitely possible. And as the price points continue to drop, this will become ever more feasible for smaller companies.
Yeah. And there's billions of these small companies. Of course, There's the Amazons, but there's, hundreds of millions of logistics companies and supply that need these baby steps to get going because they're working with maybe older solutions, but we want to encourage this to be the industry standard. So yeah, I love what you said there. That's perfect. All right, moving on. We had to address the future of the industry, given everything that we saw. As I mentioned, innovations of today, that sparks the solutions for tomorrow. And given the rapid evolution of technology that we continue to see, I was really curious on what people thought about the future when it comes to trends and solutions. No one has the glass ball, but these folks are in the industry. They know what's going on. So I was really curious on what they had to say. Now, to kick off some of these great answers, let's go to an interview I had with Terry Price, a senior sales engineer at Zebra Technologies.
I think that really could be indicative to how people react to today's technology. Is it that adoptable? Years down the road, I believe that today's technology will be absolutely, right on par with what we're doing or where we want to see things move. I see automation and AI with over-the-road trucks. A lot of companies coming out now with fully autonomous vehicles, and so you can take a forklift and you just move that to a semi, and that technology is here, and people are starting to adopt it. There's companies that have logged over 800 million miles that have started that AI process with trucks, with automated vehicles, and it's an exciting time to be in technology. There's no question, and I think many of these companies, including ours at Zebra, I think we're positioned well to start adopting that next curve.
I really like what he had to say, because we have consumer self-driving cars now with Tesla and other models. We're seeing today at the show automated warehouse processes and forklifts that drive themselves. So it's not far-fetched to look and say the next step, the future is that next step in the process, that last mile portion where it becomes automated with commercial trucks.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it always is going to depend on the country and in the scenario. I think that, for example, if you're talking about a place where, delivering things by truck, it's part of it's really the arteries of a lot of industries. Then yeah, I think it's definitely possible, especially in places which are sort of wider, more expansive. Maybe it'll work better in the United States or Australia or somewhere than trying to traverse the mountain villages of Austria, trying to get a package to us here in Vienna. But the technology, as they say, it's very much there and it's being developed. And I think we can see the same thing happening also with train services. Again, country specific though, and it really, whenever it comes down to what's being automated, the simpler the better ultimately. So in certain regions, it will make a huge difference. I would anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years. In other places, obviously, there's plenty more things to work with, but it's absolutely feasible.
So what he was saying, taking everything more to an extreme with the commercial vehicle automation, do you see it maybe more of a practical future that it's automation for workers in that space, just further enhanced solutions for the commercial deliveries and the last mile portion?
Yeah, that'll certainly come first. But yeah. I don't see why eventually, fully automated vehicles, operating, fully automated trucks couldn't be definitely a possibility in the future. I mean, yeah.
Next up for their thoughts on the future trends, we go to David, also from Infinite Peripherals, going back to them for another quote. Now, this is a great insight that I certainly enjoyed. So let's have a listen and see what David has to say.
Well, I definitely think the speed at which automation is developing and what AI is able to do is only going to ramp up in the next 3 to 5 years. And if you look at kind of Gartner's quadrant of the hype cycle and kind of see where the technologies are going, it's really not at the people level anymore. It's really about everything that is digital. And this digital transformation, Industry 4.0, all these things that have come out a few years ago but are now being adopted at much more mass scale, and COVID kind of also impacted that.
David, with all the buzzwords, I think he squeezed every single possible one into that quote. He did say one thing, though, I think that's an important point. I'd love your thoughts on, Michael. It's not on the people level anymore. That really stood out to me when he said that. Now, to that point, limitations of what people can do are already at a capacity. People are working their maximum amount of hours. They're doing as many tasks as they can as a person. So it then becomes a matter of optimizing the machines and the technology around that worker, like we've touched on, to make them more useful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that, a lot of logistics companies have faced is this, these points where they realize there's nowhere else, you can't take this optimization any further. And at the same time, they're having to move backwards on certain levels just because they're not able to get stuff that they were able to get very easily before. Or it might be that, they were used to being able to access staff numbers a lot easier than they were before. So whenever logistics are put into the situation where certain things which they used to be able to control better are no longer quite as easy to access. They have to think about, well, where are the points where you can have more control? And one of the main points is their own data. You know, logistics companies are swimming in a vast ocean of data all the time. Being able to make the most out of that is something which, you know, through the integration of machine learning and AI, there is so much more which could be done. And I think that, you know, obviously during the coronavirus, a lot of companies have started moving towards this because it's an area where they know that they can actually make a lot of these optimizations which weren't possible in other areas where they would have before. And yeah, by really understanding their own data, by really digging into them, you know, they're going to find that this is where you're going to be able to make the best decisions. This is where you're going to be able to make data-driven decisions, which are going to give you a lot of the control back that you might have lost in certain other areas. And whenever those points are able to return, then the business will be so much more efficient and, you know, be able to make far better decisions across the board.
Yeah, and it puts the power back in their hand rather than it makes them more proactive. If we go back to that point again of being more proactive, data allows you to do that.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, really good. Excellent. So as a final point and a great wrap up to this episode, we're going to go back to Caitlin and Amanda. Amanda's the director of marketing at Caleris. We already heard from Caitlin earlier on, and they both spoke here and gave us some really great thoughts to drive the discussion home to kind of wrap up this full conversation. So let's take a listen to Caitlin and Amanda.
I think the biggest thing is that they're starting to really use technology as the backbone, whereas it used to be either a nice to have or a way to increase throughput or efficiency. They're really starting to rely on it as a business differentiator, which is different than it used to be. And I think that's where they're starting to look at, as Amanda said, the bigger picture, the ecosystem, not just the point solutions of here's my warehouse, here's my yard, here's my port, but how do these things connect? How do they feed each other? And how do they impact the supply chain? And it's a common misnomer that we say the supply chain. It's not one supply chain. There's many supply chains on top of each other. So how do you create an ecosystem to interact with each other? And technology is the biggest way that we're seeing that, whether that's through robotics, automation, software. But that's the biggest backbone differentiator that we've seen in supply chain is pen and paper, done. Walking around with a clipboard, done. If you're not on the cloud and executing on the visibility, then you're behind already.
Yeah. And I do think too, it opened our eyes to some, like how interconnected we truly are. So you might have the best warehouse, you might have the best operating terminal, everything's great, but what if you're out of rail cars? What if you're out of containers? Then you have that whole aspect of asset management, right? And you have to make sure you have these things available. What kind of things kind of hold those up? Are they in repair? Do we know where those are? So visibility into even the most granular details that could really slow down the supply chain or could really speed it up. So I think that, like I said, it's really good for us to take a step back and look at over the last 2 years, what has kept people from being able to really execute and accelerate their shipments and really focusing in on those dark spots and alleviating those burdens. So that's where we're at, definitely from a technology standpoint, is shining a light on those data dark spots.
Yeah, relying on technology more than they ever have before and increased transparency throughout the supply chain. That has to be key takeaways for this conversation as a whole. But just like we heard over and over again today, it's all about pushing that ball one step forward. And because of the increased visibility on everything, that really makes it all that more important, no matter what you're dealing with. Like Caitlin said, robotics, automation, software development, these are the areas that are going to be easy wins for people in the next number of years. And that seems to be general consensus of the industry so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the two of them, Amanda and Caitlin, both pointed out some really interesting, we were talking about buzzwords earlier on, but I think there's some really insightful comments there, specifically talking about data dark spots. It's one of the things, one of the last things that was said there. And I think that's a really interesting concept because, while on the one hand, a lot of logistics companies have already been working on their digital transformation strategies for a long time, the lack of that interconnectedness means that you can be doing absolutely everything and have your house in order. But if you're trying to connect it onto the next step and whoever it goes to next is still dealing with some kind of paper-based process, then, that can undo a lot of the hard work and a lot of the efficiencies that you've tried to build in. So yeah, I think that's just a really interesting concept because really taking the next step is about, building bridges technologically filling those kind of digital divides where there's still existing inefficiencies, where there's still paper-based processes, or where there's still manual data entry of one form or another, where people are, continuing to lose out. These are opportunities which have been there for a long time, because people are really understanding, as we've been hearing, the importance of, filling in every gap possible, finding every efficiency which is possible. I think we're now going to find that a lot more companies will be a lot more willing to put the investment there to make sure that these points go from one to the other without the lack of connectedness of the past, and digital tools which are able to, which allow that interconnectedness are going to be really important.
Yeah, it really is going to be an exciting next couple of years in the industry because of the shakeup that's happened, the shift of priority, as you mentioned, and the increased visibility. It's going to be really exciting next couple of years to keep a close eye on. It's a space that those who are in really need to keep their head on a swivel and keep a head out for what's next, and just innovate, be proactive and innovate. I think comes down to it.
Yeah, and as we've seen, there are the Boston dynamics out there, but there's also plenty of things which even the smaller players can be working on or can be looking at. The efficiencies are there for everybody to take advantage of. It just depends at what stage they're at and what they're shipping, what they're dealing with. But yeah, the opportunities are out there, and you saw so many of them there at Modex.
Yeah, it was a great show. Like I mentioned, lots of great interviews here on the episode today. A big thank you to everyone who did give us an interview at the show, to all the attendees and the exhibitors who we got to speak with at the show. Thank you for coming by and having a chat. It was great to meet all of you. For all of you watching today, thank you for being with us on the episode. Hopefully you took a little bit away from what we discussed today. And Michael, thanks for all the expert insights. It's great to have you here on the show. It's great to have your thoughts on a lot of what we heard today. Great episode overall. So before we bring it to a close, any final notes, Michael?
It was a pleasure talking these stories through, hearing what people, from the industry side, from hearing from the experts, what's most important to them right now. But obviously that's half of the conversation. The other half of the conversation is really what matters the most to consumers. And if you guys are interested in finding out a little bit more about that, I'd suggest going onto our website and looking up our customer perception report for 2022 on the last mile, and finding out what we've been, some of the things we've been talking about. We gave a couple of little snippets there, but there's plenty more where that came from. And in combination, I think you get a really good insight into what matters the most to people whenever it comes to their deliveries today. Yeah, we can't forget about that consumer, because that's what the industry's built around, whether it's another business or someone's front door. Doesn't matter. The consumer is always the end game. Right. Really, really nice point. Good. Then with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Again, thank you all so very much for watching this episode. It's been a pleasure having you here. Of course, Delivering the Goods is powered by Anyline. If you have any questions or you want more information about what we do in the logistics and supply chain industry, you can head to anyline.com/logistics. Lots of great content, lots of assets that you can take advantage of and see what we're getting up to in the industry. So again, Michael and all the guests we heard today, and to our audience, thank you for being with us. We'll see you on the next episode of Delivering the Goods. Have a great day, everyone.